everyone, and welcome to the Meet the Visionaries podcast, hosted by MIT Center for Real Estate. I'm Jainil Shah, a first-year student in the Master of Science in Real Estate Development program here at MIT. Our guest for this episode is someone whose work has fundamentally reshaped how cities think about infrastructure. Today I'm joined by Adam Gordon, managing partner of Wildflower Limited. Adam is a fourth-generation New Yorker who's become one of the city's most innovative infrastructure developers. He's the mind behind Wildflower Studios, New York's first vertical film studio that just opened in Queens in partnership with Robert De Niro and designed by Yarki Ingles. He's also Amazon's most active developer in New York City, building the modern logistics facilities that make same-day delivery possible. What makes Adam unique is his ability to spot infrastructure gaps before anyone else. He doesn't build generic buildings. He creates entirely new building types for emerging needs. Adam, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
To start us off, I'd love to dig into how you approach identifying opportunity before the rest of the market does. You have this incredible track record of building non-consensus bets that become obvious in hindsight. First modern last mile facility for Amazon in New York City, first vertical film studio, largest EV charging hub. Could you walk me through your thesis development process? How do you identify white space and infrastructure before the market prices it in?
Well, thank you for the kind words and introduction, and I appreciate all the thoughtful comments. I would say that New York City is a very unusual place. It's a capital of commerce. United Nations is located there. It's one of the most exciting cities on earth. From a real estate standpoint, though, oftentimes it's a bit of a backwater. The reason I say that is, even though the capital markets of real estate is largely headquartered there, many of the practitioners are second, third, fourth generation real estate developers. And I think that is inhibiting to them in thinking about new ideas, innovations, and even just simply looking around the globe to see what's happening in other locations. We're also further inhibited by a very challenging political process, which creates, both challenges and opportunities. Opportunities in that there are significant barriers to entry for anyone. But what I tend to do is I think about a very different data stream. So I'm spending a full 20% of my day, every day, learning, if not more, and not learning from the echo chamber of the people who belong to the Real Estate Board of New York or the local ULI, but really more thinking broadly about what's going on around the world, and then thinking and considering how it might impact real estate in the city. For example, we developed Amazon's first modern e-commerce warehouse in New York City. We did not develop Amazon's first modern e-commerce warehouse. So by reading and studying and thinking about that as a new building typology, last mile delivery warehouse, and all the performance attributes, I began to see that was a building type which was going to become vital in New York City for just-in-time or last mile delivery, and that we could develop it once we educated ourselves. So we saw people who were doing it elsewhere. We studied them. There's plenty out there. We met and interviewed a series of architects, and then we were able to develop the capital structure and find the appropriate site in order to build the first one on spec, and Amazon came coming. I would say, speaking to you now 5, 6, 7 years later, when I'm on my 12th and 13th deal with Amazon, that it seemed fairly prescient at the time. But then to build on top of that, it's not enough to have good ideas. You've got to execute well. And a lot of the execution, and we can talk about this more with AI and other developments, is developing relationships. So we became a trusted partner of Amazon's. And so it was not only that we built the first warehouse, but we built it to their specifications. We were very flexible in amending and modifying it for their use. And then as we found other sites and they found sites, it became beneficial for them to work with us because we are companies that we understand how to execute well on time, on budget, and with a lot of kind of flexibility and humanity.
No, thank you for sharing that, and I couldn't agree more. I think creating these relationships is so key on building on business, especially in real estate and in very competitive markets that you operate in, like New York City. Staying with the idea of spotting trends early, you've said existing real estate typologies become outmoded as consumer trends evolve. Could you give me a concrete example? What macro trend or behavioral shift signaled to you that your traditional warehouse formats were becoming obsolete in an e commerce world?
We're about 3.5 million square feet in New York City, a few $1 billion. So, we're sort of squarely mid-size, but big enough to have some institutional awareness. I handle all of our major leasing, and people may think that's odd because I'm the managing partner of the firm, and you presume that I'm a busy guy, but I want to stay close to demand. By listening to brokers, by meeting with tenants, by getting in front of them, as well as the other research I'm doing, I'm seeing what they're looking at, not only what they're looking for, but what they're not finding. And it was very clear as I began talking to tenants and seeing what was happening in other markets that there was a shift away from conventional warehouses because they were so much less efficient for a last mile delivery. So just to give you a concrete example, a typical warehouse in New York that Amazon is using for last mile might have 60 delivery vans an hour going in one side, loaded up in the center, sort of Jenga-like, and out the other side. The efficiency of appropriate column spacing, super flat floors which allow automation, ceiling height optimized for palletized distribution, and a series of other, very performance attributes differentiate this into a completely new building. And old buildings just wouldn't work for this use at all. And so what was happening to Amazon is they were kind of stalling out because they weren't able to find the buildings that they needed to develop.
And on the capital side of pioneering something completely new, when you're pitching LPs on $1 billion greenfield vertical studio or pioneering urban logistics with no comps, how do you underwrite the risk? What strategies do you use to de-risk a category creating asset and get institutional capital comfortable?
It's a big question. I think that we tend to run a process always and scour the market because, one thing that I'll suggest to you is you only need one. You get one appropriate partner, and that's all you need to fund your deals. You don't need to convince the market that you're betting early and right. But what we do is we're offering to capital that these are, on a risk-adjusted basis, the most attractive investments that they can be making in this sector. And we can point to secular trends that originated elsewhere. So when we first began talking to people about Amazon warehouses, we were talking about Amazon warehouses and how they performed in other marketplaces. So there were plenty of comps, they just weren't available in our market. That said, it was an exhausting process funding the first deal. We were not successful the first time. We had to drop the deal. Then my partner at the time was out surfing in Montauk and found out from a guy he was surfing next to that the next buyer had dropped out. We came back in, and by that time had raised capital from precisely one partner, and we were kind of off to the races. We built the first one. Now, a year or two later, the amount of capital pushing into that space and towards us was like a tidal wave, but that doesn't help you necessarily with the first one. So sometimes you kind of have to get it done dirty.
That's, I think, for all the fellow listeners who want to become developers, the tenacity that you just spoke about is something we should all develop, and I think that's going to help us with our careers as well.
One thing that I'll say to you is it doesn't end. So I'm reaching out to LinkedIn contacts multiple times a week. So this is a business that not only favors the brave, but requires it. And I think it's a muscle that you build. You learn how to reach out. You understand that you're actually offering value to the other person. I think of it very much as I'm in service to, or I'm contributing to, rather than being extractive. So I feel very good when I make kind of cold calls to people because I'm I'm always offering them value.
Thank you for sharing that. As you mentioned, this is setting the expectations right that it never really ends, but I believe it's also the love and passion for the game which allows you to keep reaching out and growing and exploring. Let's switch gears and talk about Wildflower Studios, a $1 billion vertical production facility that opened in August and has quickly become a landmark project. Walk me through the investment thesis. When did you first spot the supply demand imbalance in New York City's soundstage capacity, and what convinced you that vertical was the right answer?
I was receiving inbound leasing inquiries on our last mile delivery warehouses, but those inquiries were not from industrial users, they were from film productions. And after the fourth or fifth, I went to see my old friend Robert De Niro to ask him the question, is this a business? Now, we all saw the rise of streaming, the rise of physical production, and it turned out that he had long harbored an interest in building a film studio in New York. If I'm going to do something, I need to do it differently and better, not just differently, but better, because we want to have a voice and a market position. And so I interviewed a number of firms and was fortunate enough to meet Bjarke Engels, just incredibly innovative firm, much like MIT in the sense that a lot of his work is very multidisciplinary. They have material scientists on staff, they have engineers, they have landscape designers, interior designers, and so there's a hive mind that Bjarke brings to projects. And we thought about building a vertical film studio, meaning taking an urban response to what had been an LA or a suburban problem, which is in New York City, we tend to go up. We have small sites, but they have significant massing. We found a site off market. It was half of the Steinway Piano Factory. Again, we knocked on their door, and it turned out that half of it could be purchased. And we ended up buying 5.5 acres in the middle of New York City. I come out of a field ecology environmentalist background, and so thinking like that, I immediately thought about sustainability. Sustainability if another Hurricane Sandy event, sustainability for our neighbors, because we wanted to make sure we didn't bring 4.5 acres of parking out into the neighborhood and having those detrimental impacts. So out of that, we decided to lift the studio by a floor. So if a hurricane came in, you could be filming uninterrupted, and every single day, by giving you 4.5 acres of parking in the middle of the city, we've removed all those impacts effectively from the neighborhood. So that was sort of the beginning of it. We built the first vertical film studio, Meet the Fockers 4. If you like bad movies as much as I do, it's a really good bad movie. It's enormously entertaining. That just wrapped filming 2 weeks ago. And a very well-known Apple show moved in last Monday. So things are going well at the studio.
I mean, this is great news. I was always wondering if there's going to be a next one, and yeah, I'm pretty excited.
I hope there are a dozen. They're just so fun.
Before we move on, I just wanted to probe a little more into the vertical versus horizontal point. You've positioned this as vertical, contrasting with LA's horizontal sprawl model. From a unit economics perspective, why hadn't anyone arbitraged the land cost differential through verticalization before, even in LA, for example? And what changed in technology, construction, or market dynamics to make this pencil now?
Most of the people in real estate in the studio business did not come with any technical training or background. They typically came out of the production side. And so what I got as I went through the research, and I went through sort of a very forensic research process in thinking about this, was the comment, oh, it's always been done that way. The consultants said it, the production people said that. They said that this is the way it's done. I went back to first principles with Bjarke and his team and thought, how could we do it? Because, in New York City, I live on the 10th and 11th floor of a building. I take elevators all day, and it's quite convenient, right? And it's simple and easy and efficient. And also, we're 5.5 acres in dimension, but if we were flat, we would be let's see, nearly 35 acres in New York City, which is, not practical at all. So this idea of stacking various uses inside of the massing of a building was something that propelled the studio up. And so our process was really talking to practitioners. So we would invite in everyone from hair and makeup people to grip and lighting people to the Teamsters to talk about workflow and work optimization. And it was from all those interviews that we coalesced around the design that you would see in Astoria today.
And then just, speaking more to the design and amenity front, you brought in Robert De Niro as a partner and then hired Bianca Ingalls for design. Then you layer in hospitality-grade amenities, Michelin chefs, curated art, premium F&B. How do you think about amenity investment as a value creation lever versus a cost center? What's the ROI thesis behind that level of CapEx?
It's a great set of questions and big questions. I would say the first thing is the opposite of good design isn't bad design. I think the opposite of good design is being lazy.
Wow.
And if you want to take advantage of the opportunities that are presented to you, there is a lot to be done. I have this idea, I think about loving every detail of a project and really getting into it. And my thesis was, why doesn't Queens deserve great buildings, Bjarke Ingels? Why doesn't it deserve to be the most sustainable film studio on earth? Robert De Niro is well known for his acting, but he's an incredible design mind, and behind Nobu, the restaurant, and Nobu Hotels and the Greenwich Hotel. So he cares very deeply about the intersection of design and hospitality, but most particularly about the way it makes you feel, because when actors and actresses and other people go to tell their stories, it's a very vulnerable process. And so to come back into the studio and to feel kind of loved and accepted through hospitality, to be in a beautiful restaurant, to sit in a room which is relaxing and tranquil and attractive, that makes a difference. And that's one of the reasons that the studio has been successful. People like working there. A lot of, almost all of the competitive spaces are pretty dehumanizing, pretty pedestrian, damp warehouses, Butler buildings, if you're familiar with the vernacular.
And finally, from a competitive standpoint, you're entering a market with established incumbents like Steiner, Kaufman Astoria, and launched post-strikes during a streaming budget correction. How are you thinking about absorption risk and competitive moats? What's your edge?
Our edge is our product's better. There's only 2 studios in New York City that are open that I would say are first class. There's us and Steiner. And I like Doug Steiner a lot. I like what he does a lot. I think that we're part of an ecosystem, so I don't think about it as a competition. I think it's New York versus other cities, states, and countries versus, us kind of grappling. The talent lives in New York, and they want to go home at night, and they want a professional, efficient atmosphere to do the work, and they want to come out of that day being invigorated and not just simply exhausted. And so what I do, what Doug does, is create that environment so that if you have the choice, you're going to film at one of our studios in New York City.
Well, thank you for sharing that. Now I want to turn to logistics, another sector where you've consistently been a first mover. Wildflower is widely recognized as Amazon's most active e-commerce developer in New York City, playing a major role in shaping their modern urban fulfillment footprint. How did that partnership come about? Did Amazon approach you for your expertise, or did you spec build and essentially create the market yourself?
It's very funny for me when I get on the phone with brokers and investors and lenders, and they say, well, what did Amazon tell you? Where are they going next? And I said, anybody who tells you that Amazon tells you anything is a suspect. There's no pillow talk with any publicly traded company or any tech company that's credible. We have to read the tea leaves where Amazon is going. We see when they're coming out with RFPs or where they're coming out looking in the market. But we built an optimized modern e-commerce warehouse, and then they found us. And then once they found us, and we've seen this in multiple transactions with them, once they found us, they're constantly learning and growing. It's one of the most incredible companies. And so they ask us to amend the buildings for their uses as those uses evolve. And I find it fascinating because the only two metrics when you're in construction for change orders are time and money. And if both parties agree that things may cost a little more, take a little longer, then you go and we want to give the optimal service to build that relationship. But what was really also vital in the very first meeting with Amazon, I asked them one question. And I asked them the question because, again, my data stream is a lot different. I was sitting on the director's cabinet at Scripps Institution of Oceanography and was very involved with the origination of the campus 100-year master plan. So I was thinking in those terms of what happens when you think over a longer horizon. And so I said to Amazon, how can we keep you happy for 40 years instead of 10 years? That was the question. How can we keep you happy for 40 years instead of 10 years? And they said, well, sort of now that you asked us, it's electric vehicle charging for the Rivian delivery vans that have not arrived yet. They said, we're going to need it, and we would like you to provide it. So we powered their first site that we did with them in East New York and Brooklyn, and we've since gone on to continue. And then as I began to study that business, it was completely clear to me that in order for the electric vehicle transition to happen in New York City, where you don't have grocery store parking lots, drugstore parking lots, public libraries, a lot of municipal space, it has to happen on private sector land. And it's got to be fast, like a gas station. And so that got us into it. And so now we're developing the largest station, will be the largest station in the city at JFK Airport. We're doing one with Revel at LaGuardia Airport. We're working, with others at important logistical points in New York City. For example, Maspeth, which is sort of north, south, east, and west on the compass points, and it's long been an attractive industrial market, or Hunts Point, which is the largest food terminal market in the world. So we have 3 or 4 sites there. So it's really sort of thinking ahead for the needs of urban infrastructure in New York City.
And for listeners less familiar with logistics infrastructure, what's the paradigm shift? How do modern e-commerce fulfillment centers differ architecturally and operationally from traditional distribution warehouses? What are the critical design specs?
Well, the first thing I would say is I think that the era for building important buildings is over. And the focus for me has long been building important infrastructure. The buildings are part of that infrastructure. Charging stations are part of that infrastructure. But then as we move through the design process, again, we're thinking about features and functionality, but we're also thinking about design. So when I started building the first Amazon warehouse, I started doing a lot of research, and I got obsessed with the design of German and Swiss pharmaceutical buildings because I loved kind of the gestalt of their design. And so we started embedding some of those design cues in our Amazon warehouses. As I was saying before, typical Amazon delivery, there's highly specific attributes for loading, for floor loads, floor flatness, column spacing, ceiling height. Really any specification you could imagine in a warehouse are highly specific to this building typology.
That's really interesting, all the different types of buildings and asset classes you studied to come up with this brilliantly planned and designed logistics infrastructure.
Well, it's also fun, right? Why build an ugly building when you have a choice?
Yep. And I'm really enjoying this conversation. Looking ahead, where do you see last mile logistics evolving in constrained urban markets similar to New York City? Are we talking micro-fulfillment, vertical warehousing, adaptive reuse?
I can tell you what I'm seeing now, and I think we'll continue to see kind of a proliferation of that. Amazon and others have real concerns about unionization, and so they are outsourcing and have been outsourcing a lot of their driving. The cities are also incredibly complex and congested. And so the rise of the micro-fulfillment warehouses as another step in the supply chain, and the fulfillment bicycles, they have these wonderful, they look sort of like coolie taxis or something, and they're able to pedal in the bike lane. They can roam almost everywhere, and they offer last mile delivery out of what are, I believe, roughly 7 to 10,000 foot micro warehouses scattered throughout the city. Are super interesting. Unlike what we build, which is highly specialized, you could imagine any vacant retail store of that size could potentially be a micro fulfillment warehouse. And then the drivers have a battery assisted bicycle with 2 swappable batteries, giving them about 10 hours of battery life as they go through the city. So I think we're going to continue to see that. I think that we're going to continue to see Amazon and others filling in, as demand becomes more mature in various areas. But contra to that is, in New York City and elsewhere, there are movements afoot to ban last mile delivery warehouses. And it may happen in New York City the way most self-storage development was banned in New York City. It was another early business that we were in. So, we're always keenly aware of the political environment, and we understand one further attribute of building an attractive building is it's less offensive to the people that live there. And that may have long-term implications for the development of future sites.
Thank you for sharing that. Zooming out to your broader portfolio and outlook, for MIT students considering careers in development or prop tech, especially in category creating real estate, what advice would you offer? How do you cultivate the forward-looking pattern recognition that drives your deal flow?
Let me say the first thing. I'm not your mother and father, so I'm not going to tell you a lot of things that are going to make you feel warm and fuzzy. I'm going to, frankly, hopefully unnerve you a little bit. If you think you're going to get into a major food group and succeed, if you think you're going to go to a fund and be the next Steven Schwartzman, it's not going to happen. First of all, Steven Schwartzman, he's probably in his 80s, is not leaving. These very smart guys are making an enormous amount of money, and they're not going anywhere. Their goal is to outsource with AI as many of entry-level jobs as they possibly can. And in all the major food groups, when you look at analyst, associates, and vice presidents, they are conceived of as overhead. And overhead is something to be minimized. So the most risk-free way to plan your career, and I'm kind of underlining this, is to go into alternative and emerging asset classes, because that's where the opportunity is to get into newer businesses that are new to everyone, where you can be an expert, you can grow category defining and interesting opportunities. And because these are not totally well understood and well trafficked and relatively newer businesses, the margins are much, much better. So you can do good and do well. But the old game plan doesn't work. And, Goldman has been announcing the reduction of hires in their business, even though they've enjoyed record profits. Others are following quietly now, but it's going to steamroll.
That's fantastic advice for me, my friends at MIT, and I think just for the listeners in general is find your niche, look at what's new, and try to create your expertise there. The incumbents aren't going anywhere.
Incumbents aren't going anywhere, and all of the profits have been arbitraged out. The marketplace is too efficient. All of these things said, there's never been a better time to go into the business, because there is so much dislocation. Climate change, fires, floods, we're seeing the rise of 3D printing happening, concrete printing. We're seeing innovations in modular and modular housing. I'm on the board of Urban Rigger, which is a Danish floating student housing company, also designed by Bjarke Ingels. There's so many cool opportunities. There's the biggest single wealth transfer in the history of the planet happening right now as the boomers pass. There is luxury senior housing. There's so many opportunities here, but it's just a matter of, sort of turning away from the obvious paths and really investing in yourself to look towards the future.
And just building on diversification, you're also deploying capital into EV charging infrastructure. Your portfolio spans self-storage, residential, industrial, studios, climate tech. Most GPs stay sector-focused for pattern recognition and operational leverage. What's your portfolio construction philosophy? Is this purely opportunistic or thematic diversification?
I think what you're really seeing, we've been in business a while, so I think what you're really seeing is just capital flows. So we built and sold a number of urban infill self-storage portfolios in New York City. We have one remaining property that we got a great offer to sell in the last dip in the interest rate cycle, and our partners didn't want to sell it, so we're holding on to it. We're effectively been out of the self-storage business for a while. The Amazon e-commerce world, we have long-term net leases. It's really attractive cash flow, so we own them in portfolio. The parking and charging business, which came out of Amazon, again, has been a really attractive business, but I also feel I'm a bit of an advocate, and I'm waving my flag. It's just incredibly important work. It's some of the most important work we can do in the city. So that's where we're focusing most of our energy right now, because we think that infrastructure is so vital. And then in the meantime, I'm probably spending my usual 20% of my time cooking up my next business idea. And just to answer your next question, I'm not going to tell you what it is.
I mean,
but I appreciate you asking. No, you have to.
I'm going to take one last stab at that, and this is also our final question before we wrap up. You've successfully anticipated multiple inflection points in New York City's built environment. Looking forward 10 years, what structural trends are you monitoring? What infrastructure gaps represent the next major investment opportunity?
When you look at the fires in LA and you think about the opportunity it presents to rebuild 6,000, 7,000 homes, not over 20 years, but over 20 months. And if you think about the building techniques which are being used in other parts of the world, but not in the United States, and thinking about doing a better version of factory-built housing, 3D printed housing, you see one of the great opportunities. You could make your fortune many times over right now by just going to LA. But pick a city around the globe that's just experienced some climate change instigated event, and you will see, the order of magnitude opportunities we have.
Adam, thank you so much for sharing your insights and experience with us. It's been a real pleasure having you on the show. And to our listeners, thank you for joining us. I hope you found this conversation as energizing and as thought-provoking as I did. I'm Jainil Shah, and this has been the Meet the Visionaries podcast, hosted by MIT Center for Real Estate. If you enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe, share it with a colleague, or leave a comment. We'll see you next time.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Adam.